Welcome back to Ether Enigma, where we unravel the secrets of the cosmos. Today, we're diving into a sci-fi mystery that'll grip you from the start. Picture this: a human soldier, Captain Elias Thorne, crash lands on a Zorathian outpost near a dying star. In his chest, a black shard pulses with shadowy light, something alive, something whispering. Nurse Lyra, an alien medic who's never seen a human up close, hears those whispers in her mind the moment she gets near it. What is this thing? A relic? A weapon? Or a call to something massive lurking in the void? This isn't just a survival story, it's a plunge into the unknown. As Lyra and Elias fight to uncover its secrets, a shadowy entity emerges, threatening everything. Could this shard hold the key to an ancient force? What would you do if the unknown started speaking to you? Stick around for this thrilling ride through space, because the truth is out there, and it's darker than you think. Hit play, and let's explore the echoes of the void together. Don't forget to drop your thoughts in the comments. What do you think this shard really wants? The Zorathian medical outpost hung like a fragile jewel against the blood-red glow of a dying star. Its corridors shimmered with a soft, silvery light, cast by walls of living crystal that pulsed faintly, as if the station itself were alive. Inside the medbay, Nurse Lyra moved with quiet precision. Her translucent skin glowed a pale blue under the dim lights, revealing the delicate web of veins beneath. Her eyes, large and golden, flickered with curiosity as she tended to the wounded soldiers sprawled across hovering cots. The war with the Vexen horde had pushed the outpost to its breaking point, and Lyra hadn't slept in days. Her hands, slender and four-fingered, adjusted the glowing orbs that floated above each patient, their soft hum a constant backdrop to the chaos. That morning, a new patient arrived, a human, a species so rare in this sector that Lyra had only encountered them in dusty data scrolls buried in the outpost's archives. His name was Captain Elias Thorne, pulled from the wreckage of a scout vessel drifting near the star's edge. He lay motionless on a cot, his dark hair matted with sweat, his uniform torn and stained with ash. A jagged scar ran down his cheek, a testament to battles fought far from this alien place. But what caught Lyra's eye wasn't his weathered face or the blood caked on his hands, it was the object protruding from his chest, a black shard, no bigger than her palm, embedded deep in his flesh. It pulsed with a faint, rhythmic light, like the heartbeat of something alive, its surface smooth yet shifting, as if it were made of liquid shadow. Lyra tilted her head, her long, silvery hair brushing her shoulders. "What are you?" she whispered, her voice soft and melodic, like wind chimes caught in a breeze. She tapped a glowing orb beside the cot, and a holographic screen flickered to life, displaying Elias's vitals in the flowing script of her people. Stable, but irregular, it read. Foreign object detected. Composition unknown. The words hung in the air, clinical and cold, offering no answers to the questions swirling in her mind. She reached for a scanner, a slender rod tipped with a glowing crystal, its surface etched with faint Zorathian runes, and held it over the shard. The device hummed, a low vibration that tickled her fingers, then screeched, its light flaring red before shutting off with a sharp pop. Lyra frowned, her brow creasing. "That's not normal," she muttered, shaking the scanner as if it were a stubborn tool. She leaned closer, her golden eyes narrowing. The shard wasn't metal or stone, it looked like a fragment of darkness itself, solid yet fluid, its edges blurring into the air around it like smoke dissolving in water. And then she heard it, a low, whispering sound, like voices overlapping in a language she couldn't grasp. Lyra froze, her breath catching in her throat. The whispers weren't coming from the medbay, they were inside her head, curling around her thoughts like tendrils of fog. She pressed a hand to her temple, wincing as the sound grew louder, sharper, more insistent. Images flashed behind her eyes, a vast, empty void stretching beyond the stars, pinpoints of light swallowed by an encroaching darkness, a shape moving through the black, a shape too massive, too wrong, to comprehend. Its edges shimmered faintly, like the shard, and its presence pressed against her mind, heavy and cold. She stumbled back, dropping the scanner. It clattered to the floor, the noise snapping her out of the vision like a bucket of ice water. What was that? She gasped, her heart pounding against her ribs. She looked at Elias, still unconscious, his chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven breaths. The shard pulsed brighter, its light casting faint, dancing shadows across his pale skin, illuminating the lines of exhaustion etched into his face. Lyra's instincts screamed at her to call for help, to seal the medbay and quarantine this stranger, but her curiosity, a trait her superiors often scolded her for, held her in place. She reached out again, her fingers trembling, and brushed the shard's surface. It was cold, impossibly cold, a chill that seeped into her bones, and the whispers surged once more, louder, more urgent. Return, lost, we wait. Lyra yanked her hand back, her skin tingling as if she'd touched something electric. Commander Taran, she called, her voice echoing through the medbay, sharp with a mix of fear and urgency. Moments later, the door slid open with a hiss, and a tall Zorathian strode in, his heavy boots clanging against the crystal floor. Commander Taran's skin was a deeper blue, almost indigo, his presence radiating authority like the heat of a star. His three-fingered hand rested on the hilt of a plasma blade at his side, its grip worn from years of use. "What is it, Lyra?" he asked, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the room. She pointed at Elias, her hand still shaking. "This human, he's carrying something. A shard in his chest. It's alive. And it's speaking to me." Taran's golden eyes, three of them, set in a triangular pattern across his broad forehead, narrowed as he approached the cot. He studied the shard, then the man, his gaze lingering on the faint glow pulsing beneath Elias's torn uniform. "Humans are trouble," he muttered, his tone dripping with disdain. "What does it say?" "I don't know," Lyra admitted, her voice quieter now, almost apologetic. "It's not words I understand, just fragments, pieces of something bigger. And it showed me something, a void, a shadow. I think it's dangerous, Commander." Taran grunted, a sound that carried the weight of years spent commanding outposts like this one. "Wake him," he said, crossing his arms. "We need answers." Lyra hesitated, her fingers hovering over the medical tray. "He's weak," she said, glancing at the holographic screen. "Waking him now could destabilize him, maybe even kill him." "Do it," Taran cut in, his tone final, leaving no room for argument. She sighed, a small puff of frustration escaping her lips, and retrieved a stim pod from the tray, a small, oval device filled with a shimmering golden mist, its surface cool against her palm. She pressed it to Elias's neck, just below the jagged scar on his jaw, and it hissed as it released its contents into his bloodstream. His body jolted, a sharp, involuntary twitch, and a ragged breath escaped his lips. His eyes snapped open, gray and piercing, like storm clouds lit by lightning, and darted around the room, wild with confusion. "Where am I?" he rasped, his voice rough as gravel, dry from disuse. "You're on Zorathian Outpost 17, Lyra said, stepping into his line of sight. Her glowing form seemed to catch his attention, his gaze locking onto her with a mix of wariness and wonder. "I'm Nurse Lyra. You were found in a crashed ship. Do you remember what happened?" Elias blinked, his eyes focusing slowly as he took her in, her translucent skin, her golden eyes, the faint shimmer of her hair. "Crash, yeah," he said, wincing as he shifted on the cot. The horde ambushed us. My crew, he stopped, a flicker of pain crossing his face, not just from his wounds. His hand flew to his chest, fingers brushing the shard, and his expression hardened. What the hell is this? You tell us, Taran said, stepping closer, his towering frame casting a shadow over the cot. What did you bring onto my outpost? I didn't bring anything, Elias snapped, his voice tight with pain and defiance. We were scouting the rim when something hit us, a wave, like black static. It tore through the ship. I felt it, burning, like fire in my veins. Then I woke up here with this thing stuck in me. Lyra glanced at the shard. Its pulsing had quickened, a steady rhythm that matched the pounding of her own heart. The whispers grew more insistent, clawing at the edges of her mind. She grabbed a handheld probe, a sleek, silver tool with a glowing tip, and pressed it to the object. The device crackled, static bursting from its speaker, then emitted a burst of sound, those same fragmented voices, now audible to everyone in the room. Seek the source, we are near. Taran stepped back, his hand tightening on his blade's hilt. What is that? He demanded, his voice sharp with alarm. It's talking, Lyra said, her voice trembling as she stared at the probe. Through him. Elias groaned, clutching his head with both hands. It's in me, he said, his voice breaking. I can hear it now louder. It's showing me things. A planet, covered in ash. Something waiting there. Waiting. Taran barked, his eyes narrowing. What's waiting? Before Elias could answer, the outpost shuddered violently. A deep, resonant hum vibrated through the walls, rattling the cots and dimming the lights to a faint flicker. The glowing orbs above flared wildly, their soft hum turning into a high-pitched whine, then winked out one by one, plunging the medbay into near darkness. Lyra stumbled, catching herself on Elias's cot as the floor tilted beneath her. What's happening? She cried, her voice lost in the growing roar. Station alert, a robotic voice blared over the intercom, its tone flat and emotionless. Unidentified anomaly detected in Sector 3. All personnel to defensive positions. Taran's communicator buzzed, a harsh sound cutting through the chaos. Commander, you need to see this, a panicked voice reported, crackling with static. Something's outside. It's huge. Stay here, Taran ordered Lyra, his voice clipped as he turned toward the door. He barked commands to the guards trailing him, two armored Zorathians with plasma rifles slung across their backs, and stormed out, the doors hissing shut behind him. Left alone, Lyra turned to Elias, her golden eyes wide with fear and determination. What did you bring here? She demanded, stepping closer to the cot. I don't know, he said, his voice strained as he pushed himself up on one elbow. But it's coming for me, I can feel it. The hum intensified, shaking the floor so hard that tools clattered off the trays. Lyra glanced at Elias's chest, a shard's light spread, black veins snaking outward across his skin, curling up his neck like roots burrowing through soil. His eyes flickered, a faint glow shimmering in them, mirroring the shard's eerie pulse. She grabbed the probe again, her hands trembling as she pressed it to the object, desperate for answers. The voices crackled through once more, louder, clearer. Return, the echo, we claim. The medbay's viewport shuddered open with a groan, revealing the void beyond. A shadow loomed outside, a colossal shape, its edges jagged and fluid, like ink spilled across the stars. It wasn't a ship, it was alive, its surface rippling with faint pulses of black light that synced perfectly with the shard in Elias's chest. Tendrils of shadow stretched toward the outpost, curling like fingers reaching for prey, their tips shimmering with a faint, oily sheen. Lyra staggered back, her breath hitching in her throat. "That's no horde," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum. Elias forced himself upright, grimacing as pain shot through him. "It's them," he said, his voice tight. "The ones who sent this thing?" The entity pulsed, a wave of energy that made the air thrum, and the hum became a deafening roar. Cracks splintered across the viewport, spider-webbing outward as the station groaned under the strain. Lyra grabbed Elias's arm, pulling him to his feet with surprising strength. "We need to get out of here," she said, her tone urgent. He nodded, leaning heavily on her as they stumbled into the corridor. The outpost was chaos. Sparks flew from shattered panels, soldiers shouted orders that were lost in the noise, and the air grew thick with a strange, metallic scent, sharp and bitter. The black veins on Elias's skin glowed brighter, pulsing in time with the entity's movements outside, and the whispers in Lyra's head sharpened into a single, chilling command: "Run!" They pushed through the panicked crowd, dodging falling debris as the outpost's crystalline walls began to fracture, hairline cracks spreading like ice under pressure. The hum was deafening now, a sound that seemed to claw at Lyra's bones, vibrating through her skull. She led Elias toward the hangar bay, her mind racing with every step. Whatever this entity was, it wasn't here to negotiate, it was here to take something, and Elias was the key. She didn't know why, didn't know how, but she knew they couldn't let it win. The hangar bay doors hissed open, revealing a row of sleek Zorathian shuttles, their hulls shimmering like polished obsidian under the flickering emergency lights. Lyra shoved Elias into the nearest one, guiding him to the co-pilot's seat as he stumbled, his strength fading. She climbed into the pilot's chair, her hands flying over the controls buttons glowing with faint runes, levers slick with condensation from the failing climate systems. Her fingers trembled as she powered up the engines, the shuttle's hum a faint counterpoint to the roar outside. "Hold on," she said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. The shuttle lurched forward just as the outpost's outer hull buckled with a sickening crunch. Through the cockpit window, Lyra saw the entity's tendrils pierce the station, wrapping around it like a predator claiming its prey, crushing metal and crystal with ease. The shuttle shot into the void, the dying star's red light fading behind them as they broke free of the outpost's gravity well. Elias gripped the armrest, his knuckles white, his breathing ragged. "It's not chasing us," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the engine's hum. "It's guiding us." Lyra glanced at him, then at the shuttle's scanner, a small screen embedded in the console. Coordinates blinked on screen: a distant planet, uncharted, its surface cloaked in swirling ash clouds that glowed faintly in the scanner's readings. "That's where it wants us to go," she said, setting the course with a flick of her wrist. The shard in Elias's chest pulsed in sync with the scanner, a steady beat that sent a chill down her spine, as if it were agreeing with her. The journey stretched into hours, the shuttle streaking through the endless black of space. Lyra kept her eyes on the controls, her hands steady despite the exhaustion tugging at her limbs, but her mind churned with questions. What was the shard? Why could she hear it when no one else could? The whispers had quieted, but she could still feel them, lingering like a shadow in her thoughts, a presence she couldn't shake. She glanced at Elias, slumped in the co-pilot's seat, his face pale and slick with sweat. The black veins had spread further, threading across his shoulders, faint but growing, a dark map etched into his skin. "Talk to me," she said, breaking the oppressive silence. "What happened out there before the crash? I need to understand." Elias took a shaky breath, his eyes half closed as he fought to focus. "We were mapping the rim," he said, his voice rough and halting. "Orders came from High Command: check for horde activity near the star's edge. Routine stuff, or so we thought. But there was nothing out there, no ships, no signals, just static on the comms, thick and buzzing like a swarm of insects. Then, that wave hit. It wasn't energy, not like anything I've seen. It moved through us, like it was alive, a black tide that burned and twisted everything it touched. I saw he paused, his eyes distant, lost in a memory. I saw my crew vanish. 1 second they were there, screaming, clawing at the air, then, gone. Dissolved into shadows, like they'd never existed. Just me left, and that thing in my chest, burning its way in. Lyra's stomach tightened, a cold knot forming in her gut. A wave that takes people, she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Not takes, Elias said, his voice dropping to a haunted murmur. Changes. I felt it trying to pull me apart, piece by piece, my mind, my body, everything. But I fought it, held on somehow. Maybe that's why I'm still here, still me. Before she could respond, the shuttle jolted, a sharp tremor that sent a ripple through the hull. A proximity alert blared, a shrill beep cutting through the cabin, and the viewport filled with the sight of the ashed planet. It loomed ahead, a gray sphere wrapped in swirling storms, its surface pocked with jagged craters that glowed faintly in the dim light of distant stars. The scanner pinged a faint signal emanating from the planet's core, a steady pulse that matched the shard's rhythm like a heartbeat echoing across the void. We're here, Lyra said, guiding the shuttle into orbit with practiced ease. The atmosphere crackled as they descended, ash and wind buffeting the hull, a gritty howl that scratched at the metal. She landed on a rocky plateau, the ground trembling faintly beneath them as the shuttle settled. Outside, the air was thick with gray dust, visibility low, the horizon swallowed by swirling clouds. Strange, twisted formations rose from the surface, black, crystalline spires that shimmered like the shard, their surfaces etched with faint, glowing runes that pulsed in time with the wind. Elias unbuckled his harness, wincing as he stood, his movements slow and pained. It's stronger here, he said, clutching his chest. The voices, they are screaming now, louder than ever. Lyra grabbed a portable scanner and a plasma pistol from the shuttle's locker, her hands steady despite the unease gnawing at her. Then we find out what they want, she said, her voice firm. She opened the hatch, and a gust of ash-filled wind rushed in, carrying a low, mournful howl that sent a shiver down her spine. They stepped out, the ground crunching under their boots like shattered glass. The spires loomed taller up close, their twisted shapes bending slightly as if swaying in the wind, their runes glowing brighter with each step they took. The shard in Elias's chest flared, a sudden burst of light that made him stumble, clutching it with a gasp. It's pulling me, he said, his voice tight with pain. That way. Lyra followed his gaze to a massive crater in the distance, its edges glowing with a faint, black light that pulsed in rhythm with the shard. The whispers in her head surged again, sharper now, forming words she could almost understand. Come, see, the echo. She swallowed hard, her throat dry, and nodded. Let's go, she said, stepping forward into the swirling ash. They trekked across the plateau, the wind howling around them, a relentless force that tugged at their clothes and stung their skin with tiny grains of dust. The spires seemed to shift as they passed, their shapes bending unnaturally, as if watching them with unseen eyes. Lyra's scanner beeped wildly, its readings spiking energy levels off the charts, fluctuating in patterns that made no sense, yet carried a rhythm that felt alive. Her golden eyes darted to Elias, walking beside her, his steps unsteady but determined. The black veins had reached his face, threading around his eyes in delicate, spiderweb patterns, and his irises glowed faintly with the same light as the shard, a soft, eerie shimmer that made him look less human with every passing moment. Elias, she said, her voice tight with worry. You're changing. He met her gaze, his expression grim, the glow in his eyes casting faint shadows on his scarred face. I know, he said, his voice low and strained. I can feel it inside me, spreading. It's not just a shard. It's part of something bigger, something alive. They reached the crater's edge and peered down, the wind whipping their hair as they stood on the precipice. At its center stood a structure, a towering, obsidian monolith, its surface rippling like liquid shadow, smooth yet constantly shifting, as if it couldn't decide on a single form. The air around it shimmered with heat, distorting the view like a mirage, and the whispers in Lyra's head became a chorus, deafening, a cacophony of voices that drowned out the wind. The shard in Elias's chest pulsed violently, a burst of light that illuminated the crater in stark, black and white relief, and he cried out, falling to his knees with a sharp gasp. Lyra dropped beside him, gripping his shoulders to steady him. Stay with me, she shouted over the noise. What's happening? It's waking up, he rasped, his voice cracking as he clutched the shard. The echo, it's here, right here. The monolith pulsed, a deep, resonant throb that shook the ground beneath them. Cracks split the crater's floor, jagged lines that glowed with black light, and from them rose tendrils of shadow, curling upward like smoke caught in a draft. They twisted and coiled, forming a shape, a figure, humanoid yet impossibly tall, its body a mass of shifting shadows that seemed to drink in the light around it. Its eyes opened, twin voids that burned with a cold, endless glow, and it turned toward Elias, its gaze heavy and unyielding. Lyra raised her plasma pistol, her hands trembling as she aimed it at the figure. What are you? She demanded, her voice shaking but defiant. The figure's voice echoed through the air, deep and resonant, layered with the whispers that had haunted her since the medbay. We are the echoes, it said, each word a weight that pressed against her chest. The lost. The seekers. This one carries our fragment. He is ours. No. Lyra shouted, stepping in front of Elias, her pistol steady now despite the fear clawing at her. He's not yours. He's alive, he's human. The figure tilted its head, its glowing eyes narrowing as if studying her. He is the bridge, it said, its voice calm yet menacing. The fragment chose him. Through him, we return. Elias staggered to his feet, the shard glowing so brightly it cast harsh shadows across the crater's walls. I didn't choose this, he growled, his voice raw with anger and pain. Get it out of me? The echoes laughed, a sound like breaking glass, sharp and discordant, cutting through the air. It is you now, they said. You cannot unmake what is made. The tendrils lunged, swift and silent, wrapping around Elias's legs like ropes of shadow. He screamed, clawing at them with desperate hands, but they pulled him toward the monolith, dragging him across the ash-covered ground. Lyra fired her pistol, plasma bolts sizzling through the air with a sharp hiss, but they passed through the figure harmlessly, dissipating into faint sparks. She dropped the weapon and grabbed Elias's arm, pulling with all her strength, her boots digging into the dirt. I'm not losing you, she yelled, her voice breaking. The shard pulsed again, a sudden, violent burst of energy that erupted from Elias's chest, knocking Lyra back onto the ground. The tendrils released him, recoiling as he fell, gasping for breath. The echoes staggered, their shadowy form flickering like a flame caught in a gust. The bridge resists, they hissed, their voice laced with frustration. But it cannot stop us. Lyra scrambled to Elias's side, her heart pounding against her ribs. What do we do? She asked, her hands hovering over him, unsure where to touch. He clutched the shard, his glowing eyes meeting hers, fierce despite the pain. It's in me but I can feel it, he said, his voice steadying. I can fight it. Help me. She nodded, grabbing the scanner from her belt. She pressed it to the shard, her fingers fumbling as she adjusted its settings to amplify the signal, pushing the device to its limits. The scanner whined, a high-pitched sound that grew louder, then emitted a piercing tone that cut through the air like a blade. The echoes shrieked, their tendrils thrashing wildly as the sound disrupted their form, tearing at the edges of their shadowy mass. Elias gritted his teeth, his body trembling as the shard pulsed in response. Keep going, he said, his voice strained but determined. It's working. The monolith pulsed faster, its rhythm frantic, and cracks spread across its surface, glowing with black light. Lyra pushed the scanner harder, the tone rising to a deafening pitch that drowned out the echo's cries. The figure roared, its shape collapsing into fragments of shadow that scattered into the wind, swirling upward like ash caught in a storm. The monolith shuddered, its surface buckling, then exploded in a burst of black light that sent Lyra and Elias sprawling across the crater's floor, the ground trembling beneath them. When the dust settled, the crater was silent, the air thick with swirling ash. The spires around them dimmed, their glow fading to a dull shimmer, their ruins dark and lifeless. Lyra coughed, pushing herself up on her elbows, her ears ringing from the blast. Elias, she called, her voice hoarse as she scanned the debris. He lay nearby, breathing shallowly, his body still against the ash-covered ground. The shard in his chest was dark, its light extinguished, a lifeless chunk of obsidian embedded in his flesh. The black veins had receded, leaving his skin pale but human again, the glow gone from his eyes. He opened them gray, normal, tired and managed a weak smile. Did we win? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Lyra laughed, a shaky sound of relief as she crawled to his side. I think so, she said, brushing ash from his face with a trembling hand. But as she helped him sit up, the scanner beeped, a faint, insistent sound that cut through the silence. She frowned, picking it up from where it had fallen. A single line blinked on the screen, residual signal detected. Her smile faded, a cold chill settling in her chest. It's not over, she whispered, her eyes darting to the shard. Elias nodded, his expression grim as he pressed a hand to his chest. Then we keep moving, he said, his voice stronger now, fueled by a stubborn resolve. They stumbled back to the shuttle, the ash swirling around them like a living thing, clinging to their clothes and stinging their eyes. Lyra supported Elias, his weight heavy against her shoulder, his steps uneven but determined. The wind howled, carrying that mournful sound again, a low wail that seemed to rise from the planet's core, as if it were mourning the echo's fall or warning of something else. She glanced back at the crater, the monolith's ruins barely visible through the dust, jagged fragments glinting faintly in the dim light. Something about it felt wrong, too quiet, too still, like the calm before a storm. Inside the shuttle, Lyra settled Elias into the co-pilot's seat, his breathing ragged but steadying. She climbed into the pilot's chair, her hands moving over the controls with practiced ease despite the exhaustion tugging at her limbs. The engines hummed to life, a comforting sound after the chaos they'd left behind, and she checked the scanner again, her frown deepening at the faint signal still pulsing from the shard. It's still there, she said, holding the device up for Elias to see. Dormant, maybe, but not dead. Elias leaned back, his eyes half closed as he fought to stay awake. Can you kill something like that? He asked, his voice laced with doubt. I don't know, Lyra admitted, her gaze drifting to the viewport. But we can stay here to find out. The shuttle lifted off, punching through the ash clouds with a shudder, the engines straining against the planet's thick atmosphere. The gray sphere shrank below them, swallowed by the void as they broke into orbit, the stars stretching out ahead like a promise of safety. Lyra set a course away from the coordinates, toward open space, her mind racing with every adjustment of the controls. They'd stopped the echoes for now, but the shard was still a threat, a ticking bomb lodged in Elias's chest, its faint signal a reminder that their fight might not be over. Hours passed in tense silence, the shuttle streaking through the endless black. Elias drifted in and out of sleep, his breathing uneven but steady, his hand resting over the shard as if to keep it quiet. Lyra watched the stars streak by, her golden eyes reflecting their light, her thoughts a tangle of fear and determination. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that the echoes weren't truly gone, just waiting in the shadows, biding their time. The whispers were silent now, their absence a heavy weight in her mind, more unsettling than their presence had been. Then Elias gasped, a sharp, pained sound that jolted her from her thoughts. He clutched his chest, his face twisting in agony as he doubled over in the seat. Lyra's head snapped toward him, her heart leaping into her throat. "What's wrong?" she demanded, reaching for him. "It's back," he rasped, his voice breaking as he pressed both hands to the shard. It flared to life, a faint black glow pulsing beneath his skin, casting eerie shadows across his face. The veins returned, creeping up his neck in slow, deliberate patterns, fainter than before but unmistakable. His eyes flickered, a hint of that eerie light shimmering in them again, a glow that sent a shiver down Lyra's spine. She grabbed the scanner and aimed it at the shard, her hands trembling as she activated it. The screen lit up, readings spiking wildly across the display, energy levels rising, a signal growing stronger, more focused. "It's reactivating," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and frustration. "The signal's clearer now, it's not dormant anymore." Elias gritted his teeth, his hands clenching the armrests so hard his knuckles turned white. "It's talking again," he said, his voice tight with pain. "I can hear it louder than before, angrier." "What's it saying?" Lyra asked, her fingers tightening on the scanner as she leaned closer. He closed his eyes, his brow furrowing as he focused through the pain. "It's angry," he said, his voice dropping to a haunted whisper. "You cannot silence us. The echo lives. We will rise." It's like they are screaming it, over and over. The shuttle jolted, a sharp tremor that shook the hull and sent a ripple through the cabin. Warning lights flashed across the console, red and yellow, blinking urgently, and a low hum filled the air, not from the engines but from outside, a sound that grew louder with every passing second. Lyra spun to the viewport, her breath catching in her throat. The stars were gone, swallowed by a spreading shadow, a vast, rippling mass that dwarfed the planet they'd left behind, its edges jagged and fluid, shimmering with black light. It was the entity from the outpost, or something like it, its tendrils stretching toward the shuttle, slow and deliberate, like a predator stalking its prey across the void. "They found us," Lyra whispered, her golden eyes wide with terror. Elias forced himself upright, wincing as he pressed a hand to his chest. "It's the shard," he said, his voice tight. "They are tracking it, tracking me?" Lyra's mind raced, her hands hovering over the controls as she searched for options. She couldn't outrun this thing, not in a shuttle built for transport, its engines already straining under the damage from their escape. She glanced at the scanner, then at the shard in Elias's chest, its glow casting faint shadows across the cabin. "If they want it, maybe we can use that," she said, her voice steadying as an idea took shape. "Turn it against them." "How?" Elias asked, his voice thick with pain as he met her gaze. She hesitated, then tapped the scanner's controls, pulling up its amplification settings with quick, precise movements. "When we disrupted the signal back there, it hurt them, made them falter," she said, her words tumbling out as she worked. If we amplify it again, stronger this time, maybe we can overload it, break their connection to you? Elias nodded, sweat beading on his forehead as he braced himself. Do it, he said, his voice firm despite the tremble in his hands. Whatever it takes. Lyra adjusted the scanner, pushing its output to the limit, her fingers moving with a speed born of desperation. The device whined, its crystal tip glowing brighter, a sharp white light that stung her eyes. She pressed it to the shard, and a piercing tone erupted, filling the cabin with a sound so loud it rattled her teeth. Elias cried out, his body convulsing as the tone drilled into him, the shard flaring with a light that seared through his shirt, casting harsh shadows across the walls. Outside, the entity shuddered, its tendrils twitching erratically as the hum grew chaotic, a discordant wail that shook the shuttle's frame. Lyra held the scanner steady, her hands trembling as she pushed it harder. It's working, she said, her voice rising over the noise. Keep fighting it, Elias. He gritted his teeth, his glowing eyes locked on hers, fierce and unyielding. I'm trying, he said, his voice strained to the breaking point. It's strong, so damn strong. The entity's form flickered, pieces of its shadowy mass breaking away and dissolving into the void, swirling like ash in a storm. But it wasn't enough. The tendrils lunged, slamming into the shuttle's hull with a force that buckled the metal. The viewport cracked, a jagged line spider webbing across the glass, and Lyra stumbled, the scanner slipping from her grasp. It hit the floor with a clatter, the tone cutting off abruptly, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. Elias slumped in his seat, gasping for breath, his hands clutching his chest. The shard dimmed, its glow fading to a faint pulse, but the black veins remained, pulsing faintly across his skin. The entity stabilized, its form solidifying again, its eyes hundreds of glowing voids fixing on them with a cold, unyielding stare. Its voice boomed through the cabin, shaking the walls with its weight. You cannot destroy us, it said, each word a hammer blow. We are eternal. Lyra grabbed the scanner from the floor, desperation clawing at her chest as she scrambled to her feet. We're not done yet, she muttered, her voice fierce. She rerouted power from the shuttle's system's lights, shields, life support, everything but the engines into the scanner, her fingers flying over the console as sparks flew from the overloaded circuits. The cabin plunged into darkness, lit only by the shard's faint glow and the entity's eerie light filtering through the cracked viewport. Elias, she said, her voice steady despite the chaos, this might kill you. The signal is tied to you now, part of you. He met her gaze, his glowing eyes dimming slightly as he nodded, his expression resolute. If it stops them, it's worth it, he said, his voice rough but certain. Do it, Lyra. She nodded, tears pricking her eyes as she pressed the scanner to the shard again, her hands steady despite the tremor running through her. This time, the tone was deafening, a shriek that seemed to tear through reality itself, a sound so raw it made her ears ache. Elias screamed, his body arching in a seat as the shard erupted in a blinding flash, a burst of light that filled the cabin with searing white. The black veins surged across his skin, a violent web that pulsed once, twice, then shattered, dissolving into wisps of shadow that faded into nothing, leaving his skin pale and unmarked. The entity roared, a sound of pure fury that shook the shuttle to its core. Its form collapsed inward, tendrils thrashing wildly before disintegrating into fragments of darkness that scattered across the void. Its glowing eyes winked out one by one, a cascade of fading lights, and the shadow shrank, folding into itself until it was gone, leaving only the stars behind, cold and silent. The shuttle stabilized, the hum fading to a distant echo, then silence. Lyra dropped the scanner, her hands shaking as it clattered to the floor. Elias, she whispered, turning to him, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. He was still, his head slumped forward in the seat, his hands limp at his sides. The shard was dark, a lifeless chunk of obsidian embedded in his chest, its surface dull and cracked. She reached for him, fear gripping her, and pressed her fingers to his neck, searching for a pulse. A faint beat thrummed beneath her touch, weak but steady. He was alive barely. Relief flooded her, and she laughed, a shaky, exhausted sound that echoed in the quiet cabin. "You're tougher than you look, human," she said, brushing a strand of sweat-soaked hair from his face. Elias stirred, his eyes fluttering open, gray, and human again, the glow gone. "Did we get them?" he rasped, his voice faint but alive. "Yeah," Lyra said, smiling through the tears welling in her eyes. "We got them." She powered up the shuttle's remaining systems, the lights flickering back on with a soft hum, casting a warm glow over the battered cabin. The scanner lay silent, its screen blank, its power drained. Whatever the echoes had been, whatever they'd wanted, it was over at least for now. She set a course back to Zorathian space, the shuttle limping through the void, its engines groaning but holding. Hours passed in quiet, the stars stretching endlessly ahead. Elias rested, his breathing steadying as he drifted into a shallow sleep, his hand resting over the shard as if to keep it in check. Lyra watched the viewport, her golden eyes reflecting the starlight, her mind still reeling from everything they'd faced. She couldn't shake the feeling that they'd missed something, that the echoes weren't truly gone, just scattered, waiting to reform. The shard was still there, dark and silent, but part of her wondered if it was biding its time, a seed planted deep in Elias's flesh. As they neared the outpost's original coordinates, the comms crackled to life, a burst of static that made her jump. "Outpost 17 to unidentified shuttle, respond," a voice said, sharp with urgency, cutting through the silence. Lyra grabbed the comms unit, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "This is Nurse Lyra," she replied. "We're coming back. Captain Elias is with me. The threat's neutralized." A pause stretched out, heavy with tension, then the voice returned, tinged with relief. "Good to hear your voice, Lyra. The outpost is in pieces. Whatever you did out there, it hit us too. We're evacuating to the fleet. Sending rendezvous coordinates now." Lyra glanced at Elias, who opened one eye and nodded weakly, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "We'll meet them," she said into the comms. "See you soon." The shuttle adjusted course, its engines whining as it turned toward the flickering lights of a Zorathian fleet in the distance, a cluster of ships glowing against the void. Lyra leaned back in her seat, exhaustion washing over her like a tide, her limbs heavy and her eyes burning. She looked at Elias, his chest rising and falling slowly, the shard a dark scar against his pale skin, a silent reminder of their ordeal. "What do we do with that thing?" she asked, half to herself, her voice soft in the quiet cabin. Elias opened his other eye, his smile widening slightly despite the fatigue etched into his face. "Lock it away," he said, his voice rough but steady. "Study it. Or chuck it into a star. Your call, Lyra." She chuckled, a small, tired sound that felt good after so long. "I'll think about it," she said, her gaze drifting back to the stars. The shuttle drifted on, a tiny speck against the infinite dark, carrying 2 survivors and a secret that refused to die. The fleet's lights grew closer, a beacon of safety in the vastness, and Lyra let herself relax, just for a moment, her shoulders slumping as the tension drained from her body. The echoes were silent, their whispers gone from her mind, and the shard was still, its glow extinguished. But deep down, she knew this wasn't the end, not truly. Something ancient had woken, stirred by their actions, and they'd only scratched the surface of its mystery. As the fleet came into view, a scattering of sleek ships orbiting a salvage point where the outpost once stood, the scanner beeped once more, a faint, insistent sound that cut through the calm. Lyra frowned, picking it up from the floor where it had fallen. A single line blinked on the screen, glowing faintly in the dim light, signal detected, source unknown. She stared at it, her heart sinking, a cold chill creeping up her spine. Elias didn't notice, his eyes closed again, his breathing deep and even as he rested. Lyra turned off the scanner with a quick flick of her thumb, setting it aside on the console, her movements deliberate. She didn't say anything, not yet. She didn't want to break the fragile peace they'd earned, not after everything they'd been through. "Whatever you are," she whispered to the void beyond the viewport, her voice barely audible, "we'll be ready." The shuttle glided on, its engines humming softly, carrying them toward the fleet and whatever lay ahead. The stars stretched out before them, cold and endless, their light a silent promising or a warning. Lyra settled back in her seat, her golden eyes fixed on the horizon, her mind already turning to the next step, the next fight. They'd survived, for now, and that was enough. But the shard remained, a dark weight in Elias's chest, and the signal lingered, faint but alive, a whisper of something yet to come. That is the end? Lyra and Elias faced the echoes, shattered their shadowy grip, and escaped with their lives. The shard went dark, its whispers faded, but that faint signal on the scanner lingers like a shadow. Did they truly stop this ancient force, or just delay it? What if that shard isn't dead? What if it's waiting? This 60-minute journey leaves us with mysteries to unravel, and that's what we love here at Ether Enigma. The cosmos is full of secrets, and this one's got us hooked. Could you stand against something alive inside you? If this tale sparked your imagination or sent shivers down your spine, smash that like button and subscribe for more. Tell us in the comments, what were the echoes after? A lost home? Power? Or something we can't even guess? Maybe you've got a wild theory about that shard. Share it below. Your ideas keep this channel alive, and who knows, we might explore your guess next time. Thanks for joining us on this cosmic adventure. Keep your eyes on the stars, because something might be watching back. See you in the next mystery.